Commander Audaxius. Still in love with Elite? Tell me all about it, brother.
Elite is a space game. I don't know if you know what those are, but
Mm.
just, um, yeah, I am an Elite commander. I am a Black Sky Legionnaire almost since day one. And Elite holds a very particular special place in my mind in that I was not a gamer at all. And I happen to have played a little game called Freelancer in high school. And I, at random, saw a YouTube clip of someone playing Elite. This is coming up on about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And it just hit this old dormant nerve in my brain, and I remembered that magic of what that space game genre and the experience that it presented. And I dove into Elite, and I have been in it ever since. It was the only game I played up till very recently, and it holds a very special place because it took a lot to get me into this world. It had to be the right thing, and Elite hit that nerve and kind of with spades. But as we all know, things have taken a certain course over the last couple of months. And I felt really strongly about this topic before I came to Kai about it, but just I sensed that like not only the game but the entire community was reaching this fork in the road, and it very much was going to be like a cleaving of ways. The game was going to go in a definite direction. And it's kind of a period of soul searching in a sense for the community, for the people involved in it, and hopefully for Frontier. And I thought that one point I could address now, because we stand kind of at this balancing point, is the idea, the overall idea of story, and theme and narrative, and a little background why that kind of means so much to me is, in pre-COVID times, I actually did quite a few storytelling events around the city I live in. It's something that I've done for a while, and that those themes really kind of hit home close to me. So I'm basically coming with an appeal, and the appeal I'm making now is that we stand this point in the trajectory of the game, that I want to kind of make the case for things like narrative, things like story, and I kind of want to address two sides of this coin. In my experience with Elite, one thing I saw come up a lot was the idea of personal narrative, and I saw this where people would vouch for it hard. I saw this where people would kind of mock the concept, and and I felt that I kind of saw it play out differently than I would have expected. Because with me growing up, I'm 35 years old, so I'm kind of in this middle range. I've run the gamut from like Super Mario Brothers when I was 5 years old, all the way up to the simulation games like Elite and Star Citizen we have now. So what I've seen in my own life is that the idea of narrative in games, it has come leaps and bounds as the technology has. I mean, video games used to be you ran from the start to the end and you got points, and that was the narrative. Like there was points that you scored and a little like flasher that went off at the end of the level. And but now, as the technology has progressed, as the industry has expanded, we've hit this point where we have sandbox games, and the potential is through the roof. It's exponential. I threw myself into Elite, and what I saw was this entire world and framework for me to just put myself into and put myself on. And like the first time your Sidewinder pulls up into that station, you'd like, oh, where do I go? What do I do? And like for the first time in my life, the answer was like, whatever you want. Like, go where you want to go. Does your frame shift drive jump that far? Like, cool, go that way. Doesn't matter. It's in your hands. Like, you write the story. So that was a format that really hit home with me, because I'm like, I can put a piece of myself into this. And the simulation game, I think, is that kind of taken to its highest form. And it becomes this thing that you can put a piece of yourself into, as opposed to having the goal presented to you, which is what video games were for so many of us for so long. So then it became that I saw there was basically this split, right? Like Frontier gets a lot of flack for Elite being the adage of like as wide as the ocean and as shallow as a puddle. But what I saw is this framework presented kind of a dual responsibility. You have the narrative that Frontier puts in the game, and that has its hits and misses, and then you have the kind of unquantifiable part of what you put in the game. And I saw an interesting divide in how the game was received, and that a lot of people would criticize it for there not being narrative, for the narrative being like piecemeal, kind of disconnected. And I would see people that went fully into the narrative. These are, the furthest extent of that would be like role-playing groups, groups that really take power play to its furthest extent. But it was interesting seeing that, like, what I felt was that the division of responsibility as far as like the story of the game went, I always felt that it was an equal playing field. Like Frontier gave us the tools. They gave us the sandbox. They put the bucket here, they put the shovel here, and now it's up to us. What do you want to do with that? And I always felt there was a little bit of a misunderstanding as far as what personal narrative was and how kind of it was on you to take up the mantle of what you made the game to be. And then just to be clear, like what I don't mean is like role play specifically. Like some people are into that. But I'm not talking just about that. Like that wasn't even my thing. That's kind of its whole own the little genre. But what I saw is that the more that people invested themselves into the game, that was the key to putting all these pieces together. And what I saw as one of the biggest examples of that is really like just the BGS, which is this. When I first saw it, it's this archaic Excel spreadsheet numbers game. But when I joined Black Sky Legion, and for those of you who don't know, the Black Sky Legion was our effort to expand the Dark Wheel to targeted systems to see if it could trigger anything as far as the story in the game went.
No offense, but it hurts my heart that you said that past tense. Go ahead.
But we came to see, right?
Oof.
We pushed for a year, a linear year to targeted systems.
A year
we
and
had
several months.
We had Wolf crunching numbers for an ungodly amount of time to get the systems targeted right, and nothing happened. and I to this day, I love it to death. It's probably the single biggest effort in game as far as like man hours over time. But my point with that is that the saga of Black Sky Legion was its own story. Like there isn't a single tourist beacon in game to mark what we did. There may be someday, but it became its own thing, and it became the effort that we put, and all of us like remember certain systems that were a headache, and it became like they provided the BGS as a building block, and we picked it up and we put it together. And those pieces of the puzzle that Frontier has created, but not necessarily bound together, I always felt it gave us the room to kind of weave ourselves into it and to piece it together ourselves. And that, I think, can create a different understanding of the game. I think Elite can be whatever you want. You can be an anti-Xeno pilot. You can work the BGS. You can be an explorer and not have seen another player in years. But I always felt that part of the magic of Elite was that if you invested enough of yourself into these individual building blocks, you wove a story that Frontier would never have not only the time nor the effort to do, but also not the responsibility. And just kind of an example of that for me, I think I've also heard this term referred to as headcanon, but just the idea that like, regardless of what direction Frontier pushed, you always had a direction you were going in. So my guy, when I started Elite, I happened to start in an Imperial section, and I went with it. I ran with it. I was like, I'm going to work for the Empire. I will be an Imperial guy, but in real life, I think slavery is bullshit. So I'm never once going to trade slaves. I never once in game earned a single credit from trading slaves. I caught wind of the Turning the Wheel initiative, and that became part of my story. I defected, my guy defects from the Empire, as it were, joins Black Sky Legion, starts turning the wheel, and that becomes its whole own thing.
Nice.
And that always provided more than a goal, it provided like the glue. Like a goal was, I got to get my, I got to get my FSD up to grade 5. I've got to get out to Colonia. I've got to get this engineer unlocked. But it didn't reduce the game to a goal that had like a number in it or a checkbox. And I saw a lot of players burn themselves out because they had those numerical goals that the game provided, but they were never intended to be the purpose of it. And I always felt if those are the mileposts in the road instead of the road itself, I could see a game like Elite going on forever, really, because it's that place for you to imprint yourself. And if you just reduce it to PvP, or you just reduce it to like, I've got to get, whatever that goal is that can pop up on the screen and say like, you did X, Y, Z. I saw a lot of commanders burn themselves out with that. And I feel that having that idea that you have a narrative that transcends Frontier's delivery of the game mechanics, I see that as a lot of long burning fuel in the engine that is Elite. So Frontier didn't drop the ball totally. I mean, I like a few examples. I liked the way they did the Guardian sites, that it's a journey to get out there. It's this process. They also kind of dropped the ball because for anti-Xeno pilots, they then become a burden instead of an asset. Some of the engineer unlocks were good. I mean, I think the idea that to get the first one, you have to, you have to travel so many light years. A lot of the engineer unlocks are an absolute god awful headache. That makes no sense.
Let me hop in here.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of what I'm hearing from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of what I'm hearing from you is Frontier puts in cool gameplay loops or interesting things to explore and see once, and then they don't trust the work that they've done to give you an awesome galaxy, and instead rely on you having to go back to that same loop 99 fucking times until it makes your eyeballs bleed. So like, they have cool content, but they don't trust it. So instead, they make you grind that content, which when it switches from an exploration and first time seeing it to grinding it for the 88th time, it's unfun.
I think that's dead on, and you kind of provided me a perfect segue, because I think one of the biggest faults I saw play out with this dynamic is Frontier didn't realize they gave us a lot of the tools and a lot of the groundwork for us to create the number of hours in game because we're invested in it. They thought they had to manufacture that need by all the game loops you just described, all the things you have to grind out, all the obstacles they put in the way. And I think that's ultimately one of the tragedies of it, is that they didn't understand that we will spend those hours in game for our own reasons. They do not need to impose game mechanics that require it of us. And I mean, God, I know Steam tracks the hours, and it's probably embarrassing to admit it, but upwards of 2,000 hours in Elite, which I won't be more specific than that. And I never once in the game grinded. I always brought collector limpets in combat. I harvested materials. I went to Jameson's crash site maybe once. Every single hour in that game that I've loved. I've only done exactly what I want. It took me 9 months during the Imperial Cutter. I swore off doing the rank grind. To this day, it's my favorite ship in game, and I feel a kind of a personal connection to it that cannot be simulated, because it took me as long as it did to make my baby daughter as it did to earn that ship. And then that kind of segues into this latest debacle. This is now like the 30,000 foot view of what I'm seeing happening with Elite and the Odyssey. And this is kind of the big picture, because in as much as each one of us can have a story in the game, we can have a group that we're a part of, Elite itself has a story. And it has a story arc. It's one of the longest in the video game industry. And we are at a crossroads in the story of Elite, because the game itself has a story, it has a community, and it's at a very unique spot. And this is what I've seen. I haven't played the original Elite. We have guys that even in the Discord that have played the original, back when they were a kid. But I have sensed now that in the story arc of Elite as a game, Frontier has reached a point where they are revealing that even they don't understand it. And this is kind of I'll kind of lay out my case here. The first is that, like I said, like simulation games are very unique. This is not Fortnite. This is not Call of Duty. This is not Super Mario Brothers. Like, it baffled me for so long how people could get so emotional about Elite, or how they could get so worked up about Frontier's behavior. And I didn't really get it as an outsider until I realized, like, if this game's a framework that you place yourself into, when it goes wrong, it's not as simple as a gameplay mechanic that just pisses you off. Like, you have put a piece of yourself into this, in your time, in your emotion. And when you do something like the release of Odyssey has done, the experience of the game is not just a game anymore. It's basically like, it mirrors a human relationship, right? And human relationships can be muddy, and they can have all sorts of weird contingencies woven into them. But when I saw this release of Odyssey, I saw the vitriol online, I saw the content creators talking about it, I saw this max Essex forming, I realized, like, this is about emotion. This is about feeling. Like, this is mirroring, like, a interpersonal relationship. Like, the story has reached a point where we have taken a downturn as a community. And there's all this writing on the wall about it. I mean, I think of all the friendships that I formed in Black Sky Legion. I think of all the groups that are really tight-knit in the game. I see the passion that people have poured into community efforts like Distant Worlds, but just the whole Turning the Wheel initiative, and the teamwork people put into the logistics of fleet carriers, how you can not be able to do the Triptycholonia yourself. Someone of their own time and expense will carry you out there. All these things are kind of woven in together. And the opposite side of that is now with Odyssey, with this kind of vein has been there all along, but with Odyssey, we've seen this salt creep up from the mines. We've seen the cynicism. We've seen this sense of, like, people saying they feel like some, trust has been betrayed. And I realized, like, Frontier is out of touch. They're out of touch with the story arc of their own game. And just like in a human relationship, like, all of us have known someone who was dating someone for way too long past they should have, and, like, it went sour. And I don't think Frontier realizes in the community, like, they can reach a point of no return. Like, they can get to the point where they don't know how to fix the game. They botch the release. And if they get to the point where our trust is eroded, they can lose it to the point where it will not come back.
You're saying all of that as a hypothetical. I think we've reached that point as a very, very exact, direct fucking representational.
And my appeal to Frontier, my appeal to Frontier is basically this: like, you need to think about this not as a business decision. You need to think about this like you would a human relationship. And if you come to the community a few months later and be like, "Oh, hey, cool, new SRV, like, yay," you might be past the tipping point. Yep. And I think we're at that point now. And I think if Frontier was metricing these decisions less, MBAs sitting around analyzing quarterly reports, and more as, like, this story has reached a fork in the road. You can keep us or you can lose us, but it comes down to trust. It comes down to how we feel about the game, how we feel about your relationship with us, and where we see this story leading in the end. And I wish to God that the boardroom of Frontier was filled with more artists and more storytellers than it was people in suits and people making decisions based on quarterly profit reports.
Good point.
Because I think that, the story of Elite is at a crossroads, and I want it to have a happy ending. And I really wish that Frontier starts acting in accordance with that. And if they hear me, then think about it like you would a relationship with a person, because the community, the soul of the community has taken a hit.
Okay.
And you can't buy that back.
All right. Those are all excellent points. We're going to let Roy hop in. He's got a point. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, actually, two. I guess the first one is I'm gonna call you AUDAXIUS on your claim of how long it took you to make your daughter. I think your wife had something to do with that.
Yeah, she was doing all the heavy lifting.
Oh boy.
But no,
your part took about 30 seconds. Sorry, go ahead.
Ouch.
My other point was this idea that the content in the game is already good enough to keep us engaged without them having to create loops to make us stay in the game. And Katie brought up something very similar to this, I think, in previous weeks as well. It reminds me, and this never occurred to me until just hearing it again now. This is sort of like Minecraft survival mode versus creative mode. When you put people in creative mode, just because they've suddenly got everything that others grind for in survival mode, that doesn't stop them from playing. There's people that, I mean, I don't need to tell you guys this. There's people that put thousands of hours into making tremendous things in creative mode. So it's a proven example of you don't have to have the grind to have people engage it if they're playing out their own headcanon.
Very good point. I totally respect where AUDAXIUS is coming from. I kind of think that it's at the point where it's like, dude, they're a multi-billion-dollar company. If they haven't figured this out by now, oof for them. Yeah, no, I don't disagree with any of the stuff that AUDAXIUS said. As a hopeful elite commander, God, I feel bad for him. I feel like, but at the same time, I know for a fact he's been playing the fuck out of Star Citizen and having a good time, so I kind of don't feel bad for him. I feel bad for the elite commanders who haven't been able to or chosen to expand their horizons, pun intended. Yeah. So that was our sort of interview slash, you know, I wanted to stay out of it entirely and just let Audax talk for a bit. That was our bit of an elite dangerous commander talking about his feelings, a unabashed elite dangerous fan talking about his feelings on how things are.